guys, my name is Kathryn. I'm from the St. Johns County Public Library, and we are back in the kitchen today for something extra special. We are making homemade botanical inks.
Okay, you're only going to need a few simple things to follow along. Feel free to pause the video at any point or rewind if you need to. The first thing that you're going to need is a cooking pot. So here I just have a little basic stainless steel one. You are also going to need either a spatula or spoon so that you can mix your ingredients and prevent them from sticking. You will also need any kind of honey. This will work as our binder and also as an antibacterial for our inks. You will also need white vinegar. This will give some permanency to our inks. You're going to need a pinch of salt, some sort of coffee filter. I have a reusable one here that I'm going to be using, but you can also use a paper coffee filter if you have that on hand. And last but not least, you're going to need some foraged items, or in this case I have some dried flowers that I'm going to be testing today, but you can use whatever you find out in your garden, your yard, or on your daily walks. So the first thing we're going to do is add 2 cups of water to our pot. Add in a pinch of salt. And 1 tablespoon of vinegar. Now turn on your heat, and we're going to want to bring this to a low boil. While that's heating up, I'm going to add some of my flowers to my pot. I'm going to want between 1 to 2 cups of either foraged items, dried items, whatever it is you want to make your ink out of. Once they started boiling down, I felt like that there wasn't enough in here, so I went ahead and grabbed some more of my dried flowers and added them to my pot, hoping that we can get a nice rich color from the ink. I'm going to set my timer for 60 minutes and check on my inks. Making inks typically takes anywhere from 1 to 2 hours. Now it's time to put the lid on the pot. This will keep the water from evaporating during the process. And we're going to turn it down on low and let it simmer.
So while that's cooking, I kind of want to tell you guys a little bit of history about ink and how it's made. So ink was actually invented by both the Egyptians and Chinese 4,500 years ago, and they used it as a means of record keeping. The earliest written records we have where India ink was used was the Dead Sea Scrolls, where they actually used a sort of reddish pigment instead of a black pigment. So it was still a red India ink, but it was just, instead of being made with charcoal, it was made with a different type of pigment. Ink is made up of 2 parts. It's made up of pigment and a vessel or carrier. And what that does is gives the pigment something to hold onto, sort of binds it all together. So the way that they used to do this was they would use pine tar and they would burn it to create this rich lamp black color. This pigment was mixed with a type of carrier, which was typically used as animal fat, combined with a few other like tiny ingredients to give it a thick viscosity and give it some sort of texture and something to bind to. In order to make paints of any kind or ink, you have to have some sort of pigment and binder. In this case today, our binder is actually going to be honey instead of animal fat. But what was really cool was that the Chinese actually figured out a way, instead of using a liquid ink, found a way to take what they had made, mix it with a type of tree resin, press it and dry it to create ink sticks. This was really convenient when they didn't have bottles to store the ink in and needed a way to transport it. So they created these ink sticks. And I actually have today one of these ink sticks to show you. Granted, it's not that old. You can still buy these in art stores today, but this is a version of the type of ink sticks that they would make. And the way that you use these ink sticks is by grinding it with water against an inkwell or inkstone, which looks like this. So you would gather your water right here in the bottom, take your ink stick and grind it into the water to create your ink. Now you could grind a little if you wanted it thinner. You could keep grinding it until you created this nice, thick, rich black ink, and you can paint or draw with it. Now these ink sticks are different than the type of ink we're going to be making today. The type of ink we're making today is considered to be a living ink. So living inks don't have the type of chemical preservation that inks that you would buy in the store today now have. These inks, as you use them, are going to change over time. So from the point of them being wet to the point of them drying, the colors may change. And over time, the colors are going to change as the bacteria in them change and adapt. So I'll show you some ways of actually trying to preserve some of these inks in order to keep them from growing experiments in them, such as mold or other types of dangerous bacteria. But since I plan on using these quickly, you don't really have to do that if you plan on using them right away. So the ingredients we use today, I actually had some dried flowers. You can use any sort of flowers or vegetation that you find outside. So for example, I have right here a mix of muscadine grape leaves and just some weeds from my garden that I saw in order to try to create a very rich green type of ink. This is one that I'm going to try out later just to see how it turns out. So what we're currently doing with our ink is by using foraged items or dried items. In this case, I'm using dried flowers that I had on hand. We are pooling all of those really great, rich colors straight from those flowers, and that's going to be our pigment. Later, after this is boiled down and we've really taken as much pigment out of our flowers as much as we can, we're going to strain it, reduce it down, and add our honey to it. And this is really going to help thicken our ink, give it a little bit of life, and it's also going to work as an antibacterial so that our ink isn't going to be growing some strange fun experiments in them, and help extend the life of our ink. There are other ways that you can also help give your ink a little bit of extra life. So at the very last stage, when we've added our honey, you can either add in a single whole clove and reduce it down with that in it, or additionally, once you have strained it, you've reduced it, you've done all that, you're starting to let it cool and you're putting it in your bottles, you can add in a few drops, like 1 to 2 drops of wintergreen oil, and this is really going to extend the life of your inks. Now, be aware that because these are living inks, they're going to change every time you make them. So it doesn't matter if you use the same flowers, if you use the same foraged items that you've collected. Nature has different varying colors in it. So anytime you're going to make your inks, you're never going to get the same color twice, which is so exciting about creating your own inks.
It's been an hour now, so I've taken off the lid to check on my inks. As you can tell, most of the liquid has reduced down, so we have just a little bit at the bottom. So to my glass container, I'm just going to add in my reusable coffee filter. I'm going to turn the heat off from the stove, and I'm going to add in my mixture to my filter, and I'm going to strain the ink. Next, we're going to take our spatula and push as much of the liquid as we can out of our mixture. Please be careful as the mixture is hot and we don't want to burn ourselves. Here we have what's left of our ink, but we're not quite done yet. From here, we're going to wash our pot out completely and we're going to put it back on the stove. You're going to turn your heat back onto medium, medium-low, and you're going to add your ink back into your pot. Once that starts to heat up, we're going to add half a tablespoon of honey, which is going to act as our binder. We're going to add this into our inks and mix to combine. With the honey mixed in, once it starts to bubble, you're going to continue mixing it. This is the point at which you would either want to add your single clove, or you can go ahead and add a few drops of your wintergreen oil for your preservation. At this point, we want to let our mixture reduce down. This will help thicken our ink, but we don't want to let it get too thick. It's best to check as you go, so just grab a little paper strip, dip it into your ink just to see what color it is, and keep going until you get your desired color. Now that the mixture has reduced by half, we are done. So we can go ahead and pour it into our glass jar or bottle and let our ink cool. And there it is, our first homemade botanical ink. Here I've given my ink some time to cool, so I'm just going to go ahead and swatch it on this piece of watercolor paper just to see what the true color of it is. So remember, we used a bunch of red rose petals, some pink flowers that we had, and they've kind of created this warm brown ink. If you do this craft at home, I would love to see some of the inks that you guys make, so feel free to share them with us on Facebook or Instagram and let me know what kind of forage materials you guys use. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!